Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read T-Fuss, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Humans Are a Risky Investment, written by someone_Finn. Captain Zigabit stood on the command deck, happy with his latest endeavor. The transport ship had been easy pickings for his experienced crew, and now the holding pens of his ship were crammed full of fresh slaves. A few passengers had initially fought back, but once the boarding team blasted a few holes into them, almost all of the rest had accepted the situation meekly enough. That suited Zigabit just fine. Slaves with blast holes in them tended to sell for less. On the other hand, one passenger in particular had resisted rather fiercely, and still remained defiant despite the shock collar around her neck. A juvenile human female. No longer an infant, but not quite an adolescent. So far, she had refused them the common courtesy of revealing her name, and had even bitten one of the crewmen, nearly severing a grasping tentacle. Some of the crew had been in favor of saving them the trouble and just jettisoning her out an airlock, but the captain had forbid it. He knew that in certain circles, juvenile humans fetched quite a handsome price. Though he, of course, had heard all the tall tales and rumors about humans that circulated around the spaceports at every edge of the galaxy. Captain Zigabit had never actually been face to face with one. That was what brought him down to the holding pens today. "Come now, little one," he said, with as much softness in his voice as he could muster. "This'll all go easier for you if you stop resisting. I'm afraid that if I hear of another biting incident, there'll have to be, consequences." The young human gave no reply other than intently staring at him with her two small, forward-facing eyes. Though the girl was barely half his physical size, there was something deeply unsettling about those eyes. "You better let me go," the small human finally spoke, her words translated by the implant into Zigabit's ear. Before she had been all kicking and screaming, but now her voice was remarkably calm. The captain gave a chuckle, amused by the ferocity of the small creature in front of him. The girl spoke again, louder this time. "You think this is funny? You, untranslatable. You better let me go right now, or my daddy will come break me out and blast every single one of you to bits." That gave him pause. Humans were well respected around the galaxy as mercenaries and freelance soldiers, and renowned all across the galaxy for their unshakable determination, cool-headedness under fire, and general combat prowess. Quickly, he snapped out of it and reassured himself that the chance of a single human being able to track down his vessel and stand a chance against his crew was so minuscule that they were hardly worth any consideration. 3 galactic standard rotations later, the captain docked his vessel at an out-of-the-way space station to fuel up, purchase some essential supplies for the rest of the ship, and allow his crew some time off. As the ship was being fueled, Zigabit happened to catch a glimpse of another ship coming in for docking. It was small, looked somewhat beat down, and though Zigabit prided himself in his knowledge of spacefaring vessels, he had never seen this model before. Soon the ship was out of sight, being directed by station control to the far side where the smaller vessels docked. Captain Zigabit found himself curiously unnerved by the unfamiliar vessel. But he shrugged it off and decided to go have a drink with the station's canteen. The captain had chosen a quiet table in the corner, partially shadowed behind a pillar, and was sampling a cup of something green and very, very sweet, contemplating where to go to get the best price for his precious cargo. He was shaken out of his musings by a new patron entering the quiet canteen. It was a bipedal, slightly taller than the captain himself, with 2 upper limbs and what looked to be a relatively large head. It was wearing a brown garment that looked to be made out of the processed skin of some beast, so long that it nearly brushed the floor, and masked helmet of some kind that hid its face completely. When the newcomer reached up and took off its helmet, Zigabit's twin hearts skipped a beat. There was some distance between them, and the canteen was quite dimly lit, but there was no mistaking it. The shock of dark, coarse fur on top of its head, and framing the lower half of its face, the pale skin, the small green forward-facing eyes. He was looking at a male. Adult male. The human glanced around the room and made eye contact with Zigabit, who felt as if this creature was looking past his eyes and directly into his soul. Suddenly, Zigbert felt as if it would be prudent to make a very, very quick exit from the station. He downed his cup of green sweetness, threw some credit chips down on the table, and started heading towards his ship. As he went, he turned one of his eye stalks to glance behind him, towards the bar. He saw that the human was seated at the bar, talking with the bartender, who was pointing at something with one of her 4 arms. To his horror, Captain Zigbert realized that she was pointing at his ship. "Everyone back to the ship," he called into his communicator as he raced back to his vessel. "We're leaving right now." "But boss," the first mate stammered, "we haven't finished loading the—" "I don't care," the captain cut him off. "We need to move." To their credit, the crew had scrambled with impressive pace, and after a few moments they had all but 3 hands on board. Zigbert decided that he was not hanging around to wait for them, not planning to give the human any chance to get aboard. "Boss," his first mate broke his uneasy silence, "what's got you so shaken up? You look like you just had a dinner date with an angry Garuthian. What are we running from?" Before Captain Zigbert could formulate a response, a metallic voice of the ship's AI announced, "Beginning undocking procedure in 5, 4, 3. Captain Zigbert nearly fell over as an explosion suddenly shook the side of his berthing. The power failed, and for a few seconds that felt like eternity, they stood in complete darkness. Then the backups kicked in, washing the command deck in an eerie red light, and general alarm sirens began their wailing song of distress. The captain scanned the security monitors, many of which were obstructed by thick smoke. Soon he found what he was looking for. He had once again hidden his face, but the mask and long coat were unmistakable. He saw the human on the screen just in time to watch him gun down 3 of his men in the space of a single heartbeat. That wasn't the worst part, though. The worst part was the security probe he was looking through was located just outside the command deck. The blast door had automatically sealed when the ship's emergency protocols activated, and Zigbert prayed to the spirits above that it would hold. But it seemed that the spirits were deaf or just disinterested, and soon he saw the telltale sparks of a laser cutter working through the thick door. It did not take long for the human to create a new access port and burst onto the command deck, blaster in each hand. The first mate and navigation officer went for their sidearms, and both got tagged with blaster bolts before they even had their weapons out of their holsters. Soon Captain Zigbert found himself at the receiving end of a stare-down from a very angry human once again. "All right, you untranslatable piece of slime," the human growled in his low, coarse voice. "Here's how things are going to go. Give me back my daughter, safe and unharmed, and I may just let you and your low-life crew live. If you've hurt her hair on her head, or if you try anything funny, I'm going to kill," he paused for a moment, letting the full weight of the word sink in, "every last one of you." They proceeded towards the holding pens, the captain leading and the human closely following with a blaster firmly pointed at the back of his head. The captain led him down to the pens and disengaged the force fields. When the young human saw the newcomer, her face quickly cycled through more expressions of emotions than Zigbert had ever seen. Screaming "Daddy," she sprinted at the bigger human, who bared his gleaming teeth, swooped down and effortlessly picked up the little human with his free hand. The girl pressed her face against the shoulder of her savior, droplets of liquid falling from the corners of her eyes as she began to emit a curious, quiet sniffling. "Hush now, baby girl," the male human comforted her with a surprising tenderness to his voice. "It's okay. It's all okay now. Daddy's here, and he's going to make it all right." He sent the little human down again, refocusing his attention fully on the captain and the few still living crewmates. "Open that." He gestured to the locker where the crew's small arms were stowed. Feeling the cold kiss of a blaster against his neck, the captain reluctantly complied, and the freed passengers began to arm themselves. To his horror, he saw that they then began herding his crew into the pens, pushing and shoving. He might have appreciated the irony if he wasn't the one being forced into the cage. "Now, my friends," the adult human addressed Zigbert and his crew, "may I ask you to relinquish any weapons you still might have, get into these pens, and just sit tight for a moment. The IAST has been alerted, and a team is already on the way." The captain bristled. The Interplanetary Anti-Slavery Task Force was a name he knew all too well. The prospect of spending the rest of his life on a penal colony, mining all day long for rare metals and subsisting on grey gruel that barely passed for food, was not one that he was keen on. The captain saw that the human was distracted, tending to a wound one of the passengers had sustained when his crew seized them. And suddenly, he had a plan. He would die for it, of course, but at least he could take this damnable human with him. And, to be honest, dying a free man sounded better to him than a life as a prisoner. His hand slightly shaking, he reached for his holster. He was not quite as quick as he'd been as a young pirate, but he was by no means slow. He was raising his sidearm when he felt the shocking jolt of a blaster bolt slamming into his body, then another and another. His own blaster slid from his grasp to clatter on the floor. As he sank to his knees, his strength already fading, Zigabit looked to the human in confusion. How was he so fast? But the human looked every bit as confused as the captain himself, and his blasters were still holstered. And then, shifting his gaze, he saw her. The little human, the small juvenile thing that had given his crew so much trouble, that had been so fierce, so defiant from the first. Those piercing green eyes fixed on his own, as if she was trying to drill a hole into his soul. The smoking blaster in her hands. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Caspar Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.